Every domain of dread tells a story of obsession, of pride, of punishment. But among the mist-shrouded lands of Ravenloft, few tales are as grim or as tragic as that of Falkovnia. It's a place forged in blood and steel, a land that's known nothing but war for as long as anyone can remember. And whether it's under the iron fist of Vlad Drakov or the desperate command of Vladeska, one truth has never changed. In Falkovnia, peace is a myth, and survival is victory. This isn't just another horror story. Falkovnia is one of the oldest and most complex domains in Dungeons & Dragons, a setting that's evolved through every era of Ravenloft. From its origins in the 2nd edition days of Vlad Drakov, through its decay and disappearance in 3rd edition, to its rebirth in 5th edition's Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, where the dead themselves march upon its gates. So today we're going to trace the full history of Falkovnia from conqueror to corpse. We'll explore how pride became punishment, how an empire became apocalypse, and why this domain, more than any other domain, defines the cruel genius of Ravenloft's dark powers. This is Falkovnia, the land where war never ends. A war makes heroes, but sometimes it makes something far worse. Before the mists of Ravenloft ever closed around the land called Falkovnia, there was a man named Vlad Drakov, a conqueror, a tyrant, and a monster whose ambition would one day become his prison. Drakov was born on a world far from the demiplane of dread. Early Ravenloft lore placed his homeland somewhere in the mortal world, though the truth was always left a little uncertain. What was certain is that Drakov rose to power through sheer brutality. He built his reputation as a mercenary captain, a man who fought not for honor or nation, but for victory. Those who followed him were soldiers of fortune, drawn by his charisma and his promise of spoils. Over time, his company became an army, and that army carved out a nation. Drakov named his realm Falkovnia, and he ruled it with iron certainty. Its banner bore a symbol of a black hawk, a predator striking from above. He believed the hawk was the perfect emblem for his philosophy, ruthless, proud, and utterly without mercy. His reign brought order, but at a terrible cost. Falkovnia's neighbors learned to fear his name. He crushed rebellions without hesitation, razed entire villages to root out dissent, and left forests of impaled bodies to mark his victories. Where other kings sought peace, Drakov sought submission. He believed that mercy was weakness, that fear was the truest form of loyalty. And in his mind, Falkovnia's destiny was to conquer the world. But even Drakov's might had limits. When his armies marched against the western neighbors, he found their fortifications unyielding and their spirits unbroken. Every campaign ended the same way, bloody, inconclusive, and costly. His pride could not accept this. Each failure only fed his fury. He ordered harsher punishments, crueler discipline, and more public executions. Every loss, every setback, was blamed on cowardice or treason, and as the bodies piled higher, his generals began to whisper. One night, on the eve of yet another grand invasion, the skies over Falkovnia darkened. A fog rolled across the battlefield, thick and silent, swallowing banners and torches alike. Drakov thought it was an omen of victory. He led his forces forward, banners high, straight into the mists. When the fogs lifted, everything had changed. The land still looked like Falkovnia, the fields, the hills, the great city of Lakar, but the borders were gone. The roads no longer led to neighboring kingdoms, and scouts who ventured too far from the capital vanished into endless, shifting haze. Drakov didn't realize it yet, but he had been taken. The dark powers of Ravenloft had claimed him, drawn by his cruelty, his arrogance, and his obsession with conquest. They had given him a new domain to rule, but it was not a reward. It was a mirror. This new Falkovnia was his kingdom made eternal, a nation of soldiers trapped in a cycle of endless war, ruled by fear and paranoia. At first, Drakov thought he'd succeeded. He saw the same familiar lands, the same frightened populace, and believed the gods had blessed his campaign. He ordered his armies to prepare for another invasion, this time certain that nothing could stand in his way. But when he marched into the mists again, there were no enemies to conquer, only silence. And when he returned home, he found his borders sealed, invisible, impenetrable walls surrounding his new empire. He was the master of a cage he couldn't see, the first Dark Lord of Falkovnia. At its creation, Falkovnia was a brutal, militaristic realm, a twisted reflection of Drakov's ideals. The people lived in constant fear of conscription or punishment. Every man and woman was property of the state. Those who disobeyed were executed publicly, their bodies impaled along the roads as warnings. Trade was strictly controlled, speech was censored, and spies watched every corner. Even the children were raised to revere the hawk, the symbol of their oppressor, and to despise weakness above all else. And presiding over it all was Drakov himself, a warlord turned sovereign, convinced that his rule was absolute. But this was not the empire he dreamed of. The Dark Powers had given him everything he wanted, and in doing so, ensured his eternal failure. Each time he tried to expand his borders, his soldiers vanished into the mists. Each time he sent ambassadors, they never returned. Each time he sought conquest, he found only humiliation. Falkovnia became a land of constant drills and phantom wars, a nation eternally preparing for battles that would never come. Drakov's rage grew with every passing year, his punishments more creative and cruel. He could never see that his suffering was the point. To the Dark Powers, Falkovnia was the perfect punishment, a tyrant given his throne, his army, and his dream, but stripped of the one thing he truly desired: victory. So began the Age of the Hawk, not an empire of glory, but a realm of fear, and its people learned that even when the battle ends, the war never truly does. When the mists of Ravenloft settled, they brought with them not only a tyrant, but an entire nation that mirrored his cruelty. The Falkovnia that emerged within the demiplane of Dread wasn't a thriving empire. It was a fortress state, a land built for one purpose, and one purpose only: war. The heart of this grim realm was Lakar, the capital city, a sprawling citadel of stone walls and narrow streets. Every inch of it was militarized. Watchtowers overlooked every district. Soldiers patrolled at all hours, and every entrance and exit was fortified as if invasion could come at any moment. Lakar was both the symbol and the center of Drakov's power. High above the city stood Drakov's Keep, also known as the Citadel of the Hawk, a massive fortress from which Vlad Drakov ruled. Its black towers rose like talons against the gray sky, a monument to his vanity and paranoia. Inside its walls, the air smelled of oil, sweat, and blood. Prisoners were interrogated in its dungeons, officers executed in its courtyards, and from its balconies, Drakov himself would watch as traitors and deserters were impaled below. Outside of the capital, Falkovnia was divided into a network of military provinces, each commanded by a Talon, a noble general who ruled with absolute authority in Drakov's name. Every Talon was expected to maintain constant readiness, drilling soldiers, collecting taxes, and rooting out rebellion before it began. Failure was not tolerated. A Talon who failed to deliver troops or meet quotas would often end up impaled beside the very rebels they failed to suppress. The Talons were both governors and executioners, their loyalty enforced through terror and competition. Each strove to outdo the others in loyalty, cruelty, and efficiency, hoping to earn the Hawk's favor. Falkovnia's society revolved entirely around the military. Every man and woman was subject to conscription. His children were taught discipline before they could read, trained to march and salute before they were allowed to play. Civilian life barely existed. Those who weren't soldiers served the army, farmers fed it, blacksmiths armed it, tailors clothed it. Even the clergy were little more than propagandists, preaching that obedience was sacred and mercy a sin. Citizens learned early that their survival depended on obedience. Disloyalty was treason. Treason meant death. and death in Falkovnia was never swift. Drakov's punishments were infamous even by Ravenloft standards. He favored the stake, impalement, as both execution and warning. The roads leading to Lakar were lined with the corpses in various stages of decay, the victims left to die slowly under the watchful eyes of passing travelers. He called it justice. The people called it the forest of the impaled. Impalement wasn't reserved for criminals or rebels. It was used on soldiers who fled, officers who hesitated, and even civilians who spoke carelessly. Anyone could end up on a stake, and that was exactly how Drakov wanted it. Fear was his greatest weapon, one that never dulled, never ran out of ammunition. But behind this facade of strength, Falkovnia was rotting from within. The land was fertile, yet its fields often went untended. Too many farmers had been drafted into the army, leaving villages to starve while the warehouses of Lakar overflowed with supplies for Drakov's next campaign. Trade with neighboring domains was very rare, partly because Drakov distrusted outsiders, and partly because the borders themselves were treacherous. The mists isolated Falkovnia from the rest of the core whenever it suited the dark powers. And yet Drakov refused to see it. Every failure, every famine, every uprising, he blamed it on disloyalty. To him, the problem was never his rule, it was his people's weakness. Drakov's hunger for conquest never faded. Throughout the domains of Dread and Gazetteer, we see his endless attempts to invade neighboring domains. He attacked Darkon under Azalin Rex, believing that the undead Wizard King would make the perfect trophy. He invaded Lamordia, hoping to plunder its advanced technology. He even tried to strike at Dementlau, dreaming of taking its cultured nobility as slaves. Every invasion ended in disaster. His soldiers would vanish into the mists, become hopelessly lost, or simply just die. When he returned home, broken and humiliated, Drakov blamed his generals and ordered mass executions. Over time, that pattern became a national ritual. A new invasion would begin. The army would march, the mists would close, and the survivors, if any, would limp back to Lakar to face their lord's wrath. The people of Falkovnia called these failed wars the Talon's campaigns, though most whispered about them only in private. Some believed the Hawk was cursed, others said the land itself was haunted by the ghosts of those he had murdered. But no one dared to speak of these things aloud. Drakov's spies, the Talons of the Hawk, listened everywhere. They wore no uniform, carried no badge, and could be anyone. A neighbor, a friend, a family member. Their reports filled Drakov's keep with endless lists of traitors to be purged. Yet for all its horror, Falkovnia has endured. Its people adapted. They learned to survive within their prison, even to find pride in their endurance. Some whispered prayers not to gods, but to the Hawk himself, begging him for mercy. And so in Falkovnia, life in Falkovnia became a cycle of fear and submission. Children grew into soldiers. Soldiers died in wars that went nowhere. And every corpse left behind became another warning to the living. In the end, Falkovnia wasn't a nation at all. It was a reflection, a projection of its Dark Lord's soul into the land itself. Every building, every law, every corpse-lined road whispered the same truth, that strength built on fear always consumes itself. And still, Vlad Drakov refused to see it. In his mind, he wasn't a prisoner. He was a conqueror waiting for his next victory. But in Ravenloft, victory is a dream the dark powers never allow. In every corner of the core, people whisper the same story, of a tyrant who never stops fighting, a man who has lost every war, but refuses to admit he's already lost himself. That man is Vlad Drakov, the Dark Lord of Falkovnia. In Domains of Dread and Ravenloft Gazetteer 1, Drakov isn't portrayed as a madman. Not exactly. He's perfectly rational, but trapped in a mind that cannot learn, cannot change, and cannot accept defeat. He's the embodiment of pride weaponized into cruelty. To understand his curse, you had to understand his belief system. Drakov saw the world in one color: blood. To him, strength justified everything: authority, conquest, even murder. If someone opposed him, it wasn't because they disagreed, it was because they were weak, and weakness in his eyes was one unforgivable sin. That belief infected everything he touched. He ruled his soldiers through fear, believing terror would forge discipline. He demanded loyalty, but rewarded it only with survival. And when Falkovnia's endless wars began to fail, he blamed everyone but himself. Generals were executed for cowardice, advisors were impaled for treachery, even his closest confidants disappeared into the dungeons beneath Lakar. Every act of failure reinforced his delusion that his people had betrayed him, not that he had doomed them. The Ravenloft Gazetteer describes Drakov as a man in his late 50s, still strong and broad shoulders, his hair gone to iron gray, his eyes sharp and watchful. He still trains daily with the sword, insisting that he could lead every campaign himself if only his soldiers were worthy. He is haunted by nightmares of his past wars, not of the killing, but of his defeats. In those dreams, he charges across battlefields only to find his army gone, the enemy invisible and the land itself rebelling beneath his feet. He wakes furious, convinced that every dream realm, even the dream realms, conspire against him. And in Ravenloft, well, that might actually be true. Because every failure, every humiliation, every whispered rebellion is part of his curse. The dark powers of Ravenloft do not punish with fire or chains. They punish with irony. Drakov's curse is simple and devastating. He will lead every battle, command every army, and plan every invasion, but he will never win. The mists ensure his campaigns will always collapse. The soldiers he relies on will always betray, falter, or die. His neighbors will always outmaneuver him, even when they shouldn't be able to. Every act of conquest he attempts ends in failure, forcing him to face the truth he refuses to accept. That fear creates obedience, but never loyalty. And yet he cannot learn it. That's what makes him a perfect Dark Lord. Even in his rare moments of introspection, Drakov believes the world conspires against him. He sees himself as a victim of weakness, a hero trapped among cowards. To outsiders, that's his tragedy. But to the people of Falkovnia, that's their nightmare. Because Drakov's self-pity always turns outward as rage. When his campaigns fail, he punishes the nation. Every defeat means mass executions, new crackdowns, and another round of impalements. His people live in a permanent state of mourning, not for the dead, but for themselves. They know that every loss on the battlefield means another wave of terror at home. And yet, there's one more layer to his torment. The Gazetteer hints that Drakov craves recognition, the respect of other Dark Lords. He wants them to acknowledge him as an equal, a warrior among rulers. But they never do. Azalin mocks him. Strahd ignores him. Even the reclusive scholars of Lamortia dismiss him as a brute. So, Drakov lashes out. He sends letters filled with insults and declarations of war. He orders invasions against Darkon or Barovia, only to have his army swallowed by the mists. And every failure deepens the silence from his peers. No matter how loudly he roars, no one hears him, or chooses not to. The mighty conqueror of worlds is utterly alone. The few visitors who have seen him in person, spies, traitors, diplomats, who somehow survived the encounter, describe him as magnetic and terrifying. He can be charming one moment, vicious the next. He treats guests with false courtesy, always watching for any sign of weakness. But the moment he senses fear, he strikes. He'll have them beaten, humiliated, sometimes executed, claiming they insulted the honor of Falkovnia. In truth, he simply cannot stand to see his own weakness reflected in anyone else. What makes Drakov's curse especially cruel is how self-sustaining it is. He doesn't need the dark powers to torment him anymore. He does it himself. Every time he acts in cruelty to assert control, he reinforces the very fear that ensures no one will ever truly be loyal. Every impalement, every execution, every failed campaign strengthens the walls of his own prison, and he never sees it. He truly believes he's the victim of cowardice and treachery, that if only his subjects were stronger, if only his officers were braver, If only the gods themselves would stop conspiring against him, he could finally win. But in Ravenloft, victory isn't what the Dark Powers want. They want persistence. They want desperation. They want the eternal struggle, the endless war of a man who will never realize he's fighting himself. And so, Vlad Drakov remains upon his throne, his armor polished, his sword sharp, his banners raised. Every day he prepares for war, every night he dreams of conquest, and every morning he wakes to find the mists have stolen it all away again. He is the hawk of Falkovnia, a predator forever diving in shadows, his talons never finding their prey. By the turn of the new century in Ravenloft's timeline, the cracks in Falkovnia's armor were impossible to ignore. The nation that once claimed to be the military heart of the core was now a carcass, gutted by war and held together only by fear. Vlad Drakov still wore his polished armor. He still led endless campaigns. But the truth was undeniable. Falkovnia's wars had become suicide missions. His soldiers were half-starved, their weapons rusted, and the cities bled dry by the cost of constant mobilization. Yet, their Dark Lord refused to see it. To him, this was still the dawn of conquest. Every failed invasion was simply a lesson in loyalty. According to Ravenloft Gazetteers, an entire nation had transformed into a military garrison. Every man, woman, and child lived under the shadow of the talons Drakov's feared secret police. To keep his people in line, Drakov used impalement not just as a punishment but as propaganda. Along the road leading to the car, the bodies of traitors were displayed on iron stakes, their faces frozen in agony, birds picking at their remains. The message was very clear. In Falkovnia, death is public, and loyalty is mandatory. Fields lay untended, villages were emptied of able-bodied men, trade routes collapsed under military control, and while Drakov demanded more food for his soldiers, his people were starving. The few merchants who dared to cross the borders were taxed to the brink of ruin or seized for espionage. Even the neighboring realms, Lemordia to the north, Darkon to the east, began to treat Falkovnia like a plague zone. Its armies were no longer feared, they were pitied. And yet, the brutality continued. Every year on the anniversary of his first invasion, Drakov declared a day of glory, a national holiday celebrating Falkovnia's supposed victories. In Lakar, the capital, he would parade his remaining troops through the streets, forcing citizens to cheer beneath banners depicting his victories that never happened. Beneath the spectacle, mass executions took place. Entire families were accused of treason simply for failing to applaud. The streets ran red, and the cries of the dying mixed with military marches. It was performance theater for a nation that had long since stopped believing the story. Inside the walls of Lakar, the atmosphere was suffocating. An industrial city of brick and smoke, always half-built and half-collapsing. The skyline was filled with scaffolds, gallows, and towers of black stone. A city perpetually under reconstruction because no one dared tell Drakov the work was finished. The Talons patrolled every street. Curfews were strict. Anyone caught speaking against the regime disappeared. The Gazetteers' writers described the late area of Falkovnia as a paradox. It is the most militarized domain in the core, but also the least effective. It has vast armies, but no victories. It has a ruler obsessed with strength, who rules over a dying nation. In a way, it's the final expression of Drakov's flaw. He believed fear could build an empire. And fear did. But it built one that devoured itself from within. By the closing years of the 3rd edition era, Falkovnia had become a ghost among nations. Travelers avoided its borders. Neighboring Dark Lords dismissed it as a cautionary tale. Even the Vistani were said to avoid traveling through its mists, warning that the hawk's claws tear more than flesh. And then, Falkovnia vanished. Not in a dramatic sense, but quietly, like a city erased from the map. The once mighty militarized nightmare had simply been swallowed by the mists, its roads overgrown, its towers sinking into memory. Whether this was the Dark Powers resetting the board, or the land finally rotting away under its own fear, no one knows. But centuries later, when the mist stirred again, the name Falkovnia would return, not as the fortress of a failed conqueror, but as something potentially far more horrific. a land devoured by the dead. So that's where we'll go next, into Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft and a reborn Falkovnia under Vladeska Drakov, a world defined not by ambition, but by survival. When the mists of Ravenloft rolled again in 5th edition, the land of Falkovnia returned. But it was no longer the realm of soldiers and spies, no longer the fortress of a tyrant dreaming of conquest. This new Falkovnia was potentially something far worse. Now it was a nation trapped in a perpetual nightmare, a world under siege by the endless dead. In Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, Falkovnia is introduced as one of the most terrifying reimaginings in all of D&D's horror canon. Gone are the endless wars of expansion. Gone are the impaled bodies lining the roads as warnings to traitors. Instead, the impaled corpses now belong to the undead hordes that besiege the living. Every month, the dead rise. Tens of thousands of corpses claw their way out of the soil and march toward the capital. They don't speak. They don't think. They only hunger. And every month, the people of Falkovnia must fight to survive. Lakar, once the shining heart of a militarized empire, is now a city under constant siege. Its walls are crumbling, its streets are filled with barricades and burned-out buildings. Every window is shuttered, every alley smells of smoke and fear. The living scrape by on rationed food, salvaged weapons, and sheer willpower. Farmers no longer till the fields. The land beyond the walls belongs to the dead. While crops still grow, are guarded like treasure. Each full moon, the bells of Lakar toll as the horde approaches. And when the gates close, the people know. For the next few nights, survival is the only law. The ruler of this broken world is Vladeska Drakov, a grim echo of the old tyrant Vlad. She's not his daughter by blood or anything like that. Her lineage is uncertain, more a reimagining. Possibly even a dark reflection created by the mists themselves. But she carries the name, his armor, and perhaps the fragments of his ambition. Vladeska is a commander, not a conqueror. She rules from Lakar's battered fortress, leading her people in desperate defense. Her soldiers worship her like a saint and fear her like a god. To them, she's the only thing keeping the city alive. To outsiders, she's both savior and monster. A woman willing to sacrifice anything, anyone, to keep the wall standing one more night. Though this new Falkovnia has changed, its spirit remains the same. The place is ruled by discipline, fear, and absolute obedience. Vladeska is haunted by the same flaw that destroyed Vlad. She cannot see that her cruelty feeds the very despair consuming her people. She enforces order through terror. Anyone who steals, deserts, or even questions her authority is executed publicly, their bodies displayed as warnings. Not out of sadism, but out of desperate belief that fear is the only thing keeping civilization from collapse. And the cruelest irony, in this world, she might be right. Falkovnia's horror isn't just physical, it's existential. The people have lost any hope of escape. Each time they fight back the undead, they suffer new losses. Each month the fallen rise to join the enemy ranks. Friends, family, and soldiers become part of the horde they once fought beside. The guide describes scenes of unimaginable dread. The dead climbing up through the cobblestones of the city itself. Children raised to fight before they can read. Survivors fighting in the torchlight knowing dawn might never come. And every time the siege ends, Vladeska orders the streets burned clean of corpses, knowing that within weeks those same ashes will stir again. As with all domains of dread, Falkovnia's horror reflects the sin of its Dark Lord. In Vlad Drakov's age, the sin was pride. In Vladeska's, it's denial. She cannot accept that her war is unwinnable. She believes, utterly, that one more strategy, one more sacrifice will finally turn the tide. But she's fighting a battle that can never be won. The mists have condemned her to an eternal war, not for conquest, but for survival. Every victory ensures the next defeat. Every survivor becomes another corpse to rise against her. She's trapped in the same endless cycle as her predecessor, and, like him, she can never see it. In the end, Falkovnia isn't just a story about armies or undead sieges. It's a tragedy of obsession. The idea that some people would rather destroy the world than admit they have lost. It could be Vlad Drakov endlessly reliving his defeats, or Vladeska sacrificing her own people for one more night of survival. Each is trapped in a war of their own making, and maybe that's what the dark powers really are. Not gods, not devils, but mirrors. They don't punish the wicked by invention, they punish them by reflection. They give every tyrant the world they think they deserve. And Falkovnia is exactly that. A nation built on strength, now devoured by the consequences of it. Somewhere, under a blood-red moon, the bells of Lakar still toll, and the people gather once again on the walls, praying that this time the sun will rise before the dead break through. Thanks for watching, everybody. And if you'd like to keep exploring the haunted history of Ravenloft or other domains and other realms within Dungeons & Dragons, subscribe for more lore deep dives here on the Dungeon Puffin. Until next time, we'll journey deeper into the mists, where horror takes new forms, and every domain hides a story worth telling. This is James from the Dungeon Puffin. Later, guys.